was the plan, okay? This was the plan. And we have to stand up to this, guys. We have to fight this tooth and nail. The reason they're doing this, obviously, is because they can't win in the free markets. People are, as Megan said, people that are under 30 are anti-Israel. So that means the future of America is anti-Israel.
Safety team is here. I just heard them say the active shooter, Charlie Kirk, has been shot. Charlie Kirk got hit, is what the security detail just said.
Yeah, these messages are clearly doctored, is what I would say. They're doctored. Now, they could decide why they're doing that. Tyler's being forthcoming. We're protecting him in some capacity. I find that to be unacceptable. Okay? Unacceptable. I want every single text message. I want timestamps. It is conspicuous that you are not telling us when this was sent, because it sounds like it's when the campus is on lockdown and he's got to go back and he's got to clean up. And then all of a sudden we're in the next day when his dad is getting clued in after the picture's been released. They're not telling us that. Okay. And you have a right to be a little bit uncomfortable about that, because I'm a lot of bit uncomfortable about that. We need full answers. Well, it has been going viral. A mere minutes after Charlie Kirk is shot, there are two men that look rather mysterious. They appear, they move his chair, and they take down the camera that's directly, or was directly behind him, or the camera rather, that is just above Charlie's head. That's the camera that I'm talking about on the right-hand side. That's a camera.
You guys remember seeing this video of George Zinn, the 71-year-old man who claimed that he was the one who shot Charlie Kirk right after it happened, to law enforcement agents, saying, quote, "Him now me," end quote. He was arrested on site, with the viral footage showing officers dragging him away as his pants was falling down. During questioning, Zinn admitted that he had no involvement in the actual but claimed that he made the false confession to, quote, "draw attention from the real end quote, and allow them to escape. Now, prosecutors have stated that this delayed the investigation and diverted critical resources, but ultimately Zinn was charged with obstruction of justice, which is a second-degree felony.
Casually mentioned to you guys something, that the doorbell cam footage, which TMZ happened upon somehow, was from a street upon which a ton of employees that work for Caldera Engineering live. We showed you, I think, one or two of those employees, the husband and wife I had mentioned, worked for Caldera Engineering, and it is a country that purports to manufacture valves. And I said this, I said, I know nothing about the valve industry. All I know is that every time I start investigating a government conspiracy or looking into people that are really shady, like Harley Pasternak, thus far 3 people who I've investigated who oddly, either them or their families had backgrounds working in this very niche valve and piping industry, like manufacturers of valves and pipes. I'm like, is everybody doing?
Charlie Kirk's death was supposed to be an open and shut case. The FBI rolled out texts, timelines, and an autopsy like they were presenting the final chapter. But Candace Owens isn't buying it, and neither is half the internet. From missing timestamps to vanished security footage, she's turning what the FBI called closure into the biggest cover-up conspiracy of the year. And the more you look, the harder it is to shake the feeling that something doesn't add up. Charlie Kirk's death was supposed to be simple. The FBI came out fast, dropping a neat stack of evidence like they were serving up the full truth. They showed texts that were supposed to reveal motive, a timeline that tied it all together, and an autopsy that they swore sealed the case. But the internet spotted something the Bureau didn't count on. Those texts didn't look right. Messages were chopped, timestamps didn't line up, and conversations jumped from one moment to hours later with no explanation. It looked less like a transcript and more like a cut and paste job. And if the very foundation of the case, the suspect's so-called words, is shaky, what does that say about everything else the FBI presented? That's where Candace Owen steps in. From the very start, she wasn't just mourning Charlie. She was dissecting the narrative. She pointed to the missing timestamps and asked the question that went viral. If the FBI can't even get a text thread straight, how are we supposed to trust their autopsy? Because the autopsy wasn't just paperwork. It was supposed to be the Bureau's mic drop, the proof that confirmed Tyler Robinson pulled the trigger and Charlie Kirk paid the price. But when the evidence leading into that report already looks doctored, the whole thing stops feeling like truth and starts looking like spin. And that's the contradiction that's splitting the public right down the middle. On one hand, you've got the FBI and mainstream outlets telling people the case is closed. On the other, you've got Candace holding up screenshots of broken conversations and pointing out the gaps. She's not just poking holes. She's daring people to question the biggest law enforcement agency in the country. And in today's climate, where trust in institutions is already cracked, that kind of challenge hits harder than ever. So here's the real question driving this entire storm. If the FBI's key evidence is already broken, how can anyone believe their autopsy was the final word? When the FBI first unveiled their evidence, the centerpiece wasn't the weapon, the ballistics, or even eyewitness accounts. It was the text messages. These were supposed to be the smoking gun, the inner thoughts of Tyler Robinson, the man they say killed Charlie Kirk. According to the Bureau, these texts showed motive. They claimed Tyler was angry, unstable, maybe even politically driven, and that his messages revealed a premeditated plan to take Charlie out. For the FBI, the texts weren't just side notes. They were the story's spine. But here's the catch. When people actually looked at them, the chain didn't make sense. Whole chunks of conversation were gone. You'd read one line at 8:12 p.m. Then suddenly you were staring at a message stamped 11:47 p.m. with no explanation of what happened in between. Hours, sometimes even days, were missing, clean gaps like pages ripped out of diary. And when Candace Owens put those texts side by side on her show, she called it what millions were already thinking, doctored. And the beauty of her call out? You don't have to be a tech expert or a forensics analyst to see it. Everyone knows how text threads look. Everyone knows when something doesn't flow. If you've ever had a friend delete part of a conversation to make themselves look better, you recognize the pattern instantly. And that's what made Candace's point so explosive. It was relatable. She basically said, if this is what the FBI is calling a transcript, then they're insulting your intelligence. The Bureau wanted people to believe these messages were airtight proof of motive. But Candace flipped the script. She told her audience, if we can spot these holes, imagine what else is missing. Imagine what else they cut before handing this to the public. And that's when the narrative shifted. Because once trust is broken at the foundation, nothing else stands. The texts weren't just evidence. They were supposed to be the lens through which the autopsy and every other report made sense. But with the timestamp shredded, that lens cracked. And suddenly, the whole case started to look like a house of cards. If the missing timestamps in the text were enough to make people uneasy, what came next pushed the whole case into conspiracy territory. Enter what Candace Owens dubbed Cameragate. On the night Charlie Kirk was killed, security cameras inside the building should have captured every second. Who walked in, who walked out, and exactly how it all went down. But instead of clarity, the footage raised even more questions. In one viral clip, two men appear out of nowhere. They don't look panicked. They don't look like bystanders caught in chaos. They move with purpose. First, one of them shifts Charlie's chair, almost like he's clearing the scene. Then, clear as day, the other man goes straight for the security camera, pulls the SD card, and walks off. This wasn't rumor. It was caught on video, circulated online within hours. People froze the frame, zoomed in, and asked the obvious question. Who are these men? Here's the bombshell. No arrests. No public identification. The FBI, who had no problem plastering Tyler Robinson's name everywhere, acted like these two ghosts didn't exist. In fact, the official reports never even mentioned them. According to Candace, that wasn't negligence. It was a deliberate omission. Because if the footage that could have shown the truth was in someone's hands, why would the Bureau let it vanish? And that's what makes Cameragate so much more damning than the broken texts. Missing timestamps can be chalked up to sloppiness, but two men physically pulling a memory card out of camera? That's not an accident. That's an erasure. And when law enforcement doesn't chase those leads, it stops looking like oversight and starts looking like cover-up. Candace hammered the point home. If the FBI wanted this solved, they'd want that footage. Instead, they let it disappear. Why? And once again, the audience didn't need a degree in criminal justice to to feel it in their gut. People know what it looks like when evidence is scrubbed. They've seen it in crime dramas. They've seen it in scandals before. And now they were seeing it here, in real time, around the death of one of the most polarizing figures in American politics. So now the narrative had shifted again. It wasn't just about broken texts anymore. It was about vanishing footage, mysterious men who walked away untouched, and the growing suspicion that someone didn't want the full truth on record. Cameragate wasn't just sloppy policing. It was the smoking absence, proof that someone, somewhere was pulling strings to keep the real story from ever being seen. If Cameragate cracked the case wide open, the early days of the investigation made it look like the FBI never had control to begin with. The chaos started almost immediately when a 71-year-old man named George Zinn stumbled into the spotlight. Within hours of Charlie Kirk's death, Zinn was on video confessing to the crime. He told officers, him, now me, before being dragged away in cuffs as his pants literally fell down in front of news cameras. That clip went viral, memed, mocked, and replayed on loop as headlines screamed that the killer had been caught. But days later, the whole story collapsed. Zinn wasn't the shooter. He admitted he'd made the confession to draw attention from the real one and give the actual suspect time to escape. In reality, he was just a distraction, one that wasted precious hours, diverted resources, and muddied the waters right when the public was demanding answers. Prosecutors charged him with obstruction, but the damage was already done. To Candace Owens, this wasn't just an embarrassing mistake. It was the first sign of a pattern. Confusion, contradictions, and chaos that somehow always seemed to benefit the official narrative. And then came Governor Spencer Cox. In his first press conference after the shooting, he couldn't even get the suspect's clothing right. One day, Tyler Robinson was said to be wearing a dark jacket. The next, it was a hoodie of a completely different color. The inconsistency might sound small, but to Candace, it was crucial. Eyewitness identifications hinge on details like clothing, and if state leaders were tripping over basic facts, what else were they getting wrong? Or worse, deliberately shifting? The ballistics report didn't help the FBI's case either. According to their own statements, agents were still looking for the bullet that matched Charlie's wounds. But the autopsy raised red flags. One wound reportedly didn't bleed the way it should have if the bullet path was as described, and the physical evidence didn't align with the Bureau's timeline. It was as if they had the conclusion first that Tyler Robinson was guilty, and were scrambling to make the science bend to fit it. Piece by piece, Candace wove these failures into a bigger picture. A false confession splashed across the media, a governor contradicting himself, and a ballistics report that looked more like improvisation than science. Stack them together, and it didn't look like random sloppiness anymore. It looked like a playbook, a strategy of throwing the public off balance with half-truths, contradictions, and missing details until everyone was too confused to ask the right questions. And with every misstep, every contradiction, the FBI's credibility sank lower, setting the stage for Candace's larger claim that this wasn't a clean case at all. It was a carefully managed narrative unraveling in real time. Up until this point, the story looked like a messy investigation, bad texts, missing footage, false confessions. But Candace Owens argued it wasn't random at all. She said the chaos only made sense once you zoomed out and saw who was standing in the shadows. A company called Calira Engineering. On paper, Calira looks like a small defense contractor. But peel back the layers, and you find contracts tied to surveillance systems, military-grade communications, even projects flagged in federal budgets for counterintelligence support. That's not your average tech startup. And here's where it gets strange. Calira's name kept popping up in the background of the Kirk case. A building lease here, a vendor connection there, even whispers of their equipment being tested near the crime scene. For Candace, this wasn't coincidence. It was context. If you wanted to understand why evidence was disappearing, why timelines were broken, why two men could walk off with an SD card, you had to look at who had the power to make that happen. And let's be real, when defense contractors are lurking in civilian investigations, red flags go up immediately. These aren't just private companies. They're arms of the intelligence world with ties to the Pentagon, to surveillance programs most Americans never hear about, and sometimes even to foreign partners. The presence of Kalira raised the question, was this really a straightforward murder case, or was something much bigger at play? Something the public was never meant to see? To drive it home, Candace pulled out history. She reminded her audience of Fred Hampton in 1969. The FBI called it a raid. The autopsy said Hampton was armed, but later evidence proved he was drugged in his sleep and executed. The autopsy wasn't about truth. It was about legitimizing a cover story. Fast forward to Jeffrey Epstein. The official ruling said suicide, but an independent pathologist found the neck fractures were more consistent with strangulation. Again, the autopsy became the shield protecting the narrative, not exposing it. And now, she argued, Charlie Kirk was being folded into that same playbook. A controversial figure dies under suspicious circumstances. The government rushes to release a neat story, and anyone who points out the cracks, whether it's timestamps, missing footage, or defense contractor fingerprints, is branded as a conspiracy theorist. By pulling Kalira into the light, Candace reframed the Kirk case. It wasn't just about one man's death anymore. It was about the machinery of state power, the kind that launders the truth through official documents, uses autopsies to prop up shaky stories, and erases evidence with the quiet precision of people who've done it before. Whether you agreed with her or not, one thing became clear. This wasn't sloppy. This was systematic. By the time Candace Owens laid all of this out, texts with missing timestamps, Cameragate, George Zinn's circus confession, ballistics that didn't add up, and the shadow of Kalira engineering. The country wasn't just watching anymore. It was choosing sides. On one side, critics blasted her as reckless. Journalists called her analysis dangerous conspiracy mongering, warning that she was undermining faith in institutions at a time of national instability. Blue-check pundits on X rolled their eyes and said, this is just Candace being Candace, spinning a tragedy into clicks. To them, questioning the FBI was an attack on the very system keeping order. But on the other side, a tidal wave of support. Hashtags like hashtag Dr. Texts, hashtag Cameragate, and hashtag Who Took the Card started trending within hours. Screenshots of the text threads went viral with captions like, even my grandma can see these are fake. TikTok creators stitched Candace's clips, pointing to the same gaps and contradictions, and those 30-second edits were being shared faster than any official press conference. And here's the part the mainstream media couldn't stop: the memes. George Zinn's pants falling down became a punchline, spliced into compilations mocking the FBI's top suspect. Side-by-side comparisons of Governor Cox contradicting himself turned into viral spot-the-difference challenges. Every sloppy mistake that Candace highlighted became digital fuel, spreading her framing across platforms where younger audiences get their news first. In the end, the official reports, the carefully worded FBI briefings, the governor's statements, the so-called finalized autopsy, were drowned out by hashtags and viral clips. The people who believed Candace saw her as the only one willing to say what everyone else was too scared to admit. And the people who hated her, they only amplified her further by fighting her online, giving her theories more reach than the government ever intended. The split wasn't just political, it was cultural. Candace Owens had turned a suspicious case into a national debate about truth itself. And whether you thought she was reckless or righteous, one fact was undeniable. Her voice was echoing louder than the FBI's. At this point, the story isn't just about what happened the night Charlie Kirk died. It's about what happens next. Because the fallout touches everyone differently. For Charlie Kirk, the narrative is shifting in real time. In the official record, he's just another victim of violence. But in Candace Owens' telling, he's becoming something else. A martyr. A man whose death exposed the machinery of cover-ups, contradictions, and vanishing evidence. Whether you loved him or hated him, Kirk's name is now tied to a larger question: how much truth the public is actually allowed to see. For Candace, the stakes couldn't be higher. If she's wrong, history will paint her as reckless, a provocateur who hijacked a tragedy to feed her brand. But if she's right, if the broken texts, Cameragate, and the Kalira connection really are pieces of a deeper cover-up, then she becomes prophetic, the first voice bold enough to call out the cracks in real time, while everyone else was still reading the press releases. And for the FBI, the risk is existential. Their credibility was already hanging by a thread after years of politicized scandals. If Candace's questions keep spreading, if the public keeps seeing memes instead of trusting official reports, then this isn't just about one case. It's about faith in the entire system. Every contradiction, every missing timestamp, every SD card that walks out the door doesn't just stain this investigation. It erodes trust in the Bureau itself. And once that trust is gone, you don't get it back. So what's really at stake isn't just the truth about Charlie Kirk. It's whether Americans believe the institutions sworn to protect them, or believe the voices telling them those institutions can't be trusted. And right now, thanks to Candace Owens, that battle is being fought not in courtrooms, but on social media feeds, one viral clip at a time. What started as a single death investigation has now exploded into something much bigger. Candace Owens' questions about broken texts and missing footage didn't just challenge the FBI. They lit a fire under the larger culture war. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Charlie Kirk, it was about who gets to control the narrative in America. The fallout hit fast. Platforms began flagging Candace's clips as misleading, fueling a new round of censorship debates. Free speech advocates argued that silencing her only made her points more believable, while critics demanded stricter hate speech laws to stop reckless conspiracies from going viral. And then came the Hollywood angle. Late-night host Jimmy Kimmel suspended after making off-color jokes about Kirk's death. What used to be entertainment now felt radioactive. Proof that even comedy couldn't touch the case without consequences. And so a closed case didn't stay closed at all. It spiraled into a national brawl over truth, trust, and the limits of free speech. Every meme, every hashtag, every deleted clip became part of a bigger question. Who decides what we're allowed to believe? Which brings us right back to where we started, the autopsy. The official story says it's the proof, the science, the final word on Charlie Kirk's death. But after the doctored texts, Cameragate, George Zinn's false confession, Governor Cox's contradictions, and the shadow of Kalira engineering, can anyone really see it as neutral? Or is the autopsy just the FBI's shield, another layer of paperwork designed to hide what they don't want us to see? That's the tension hanging in the air. Was Charlie Kirk's autopsy the end of the story, or the biggest red flag, yet that the story isn't over? And that's the cliffhanger. Because until the missing footage, the erased texts, and the shadow players come into the light, there's no resolution, only questions. And the one thing Candace Owens has guaranteed is this. The more they try to close the book, the more people are going to keep flipping the pages.